how can we say things? How can we use our voices for good?
Good morning and welcome to Recipe for Success. My name is Nancy Giacalone. If this is your first time joining me, we focus on things that are critical to the outcome and success of a recipe, a technique, a skill in life, a business. And so today I'm super excited to have with me Lena Chaihorsky. Did I say that right or did I butcher it?
Yes, Chaihorsky, Nancy. Great to be with
Okay.
you.
Well, I was practicing it and then I'm like, but I didn't confirm that with her. So hopefully I said it right.
That was incredibly, and that was very impressive and incredibly close for someone who didn't practice it.
Okay, awesome. Good to know. Well, I first met Lena about a month ago in Puerto Rico, of all places, at the U Powered Symposium. We happened to sit at a table together at lunch, and she started talking about precision medicine. And I lit up like a Christmas tree because this is one of those things I find so fascinating and so underutilized and underdiscussed as well. So, Lena, I am going to let you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about yourself because Lena has a very impressive background and I don't really want to skim over any of her qualifications and credentials.
Oh, thanks, Nancy. I appreciate that. So great to be with everybody today. Let me see, I'm a mathematician, actually, academically. I studied math and biology in college, but I never actually did math for money. I went in straight to healthcare. And I started at a small women's health company that had developed a fascinating diagnostic that was going to really help women and save a lot of money in the NICU. And when we started the process of going to Medicare to figure out, what's the value of this special diagnostic, Medicare told us that its value was $11. And I thought to myself, that makes no sense at all, right? That you have technology that can save a tremendous amount of money and yet it gets valued at $11. And that actually started my journey into the space of diagnostics and precision medicine. And really, I started looking at it from the beginning as like a math problem, right? How we're spending all this money, we're wasting all this money in healthcare. And yet, when we create solutions to these problems and we go to the organizations who purchase and value these solutions and we make these cost arguments, what we hear back is your solution isn't valuable. And I thought, I got to fix this. And just like just like you said, Nancy, it was like a fire lit under me. And I just thought, this is a space for me. And so, was on the founding team of that company. We sold that company to a bigger company. I've been in biotech now for 15 years, diagnostics and precision medicine. And 7 years ago, I co-founded my own company with my business partner, Hannah Mamushka. And we set out to really change the landscape of diagnostics and precision medicine. And we approached it from this perspective of we're living in a world where diagnostic technology is just growing in leaps and bounds. We have all this amazing technology that can solve all these healthcare problems. It can help us. It can help us find disease earlier. It can help us figure out which drug is right for which person. It can help us save all of this wasted healthcare spend, but these diagnostics aren't being used or valued. How do we change that? And so we created a business model that enables us to do that. We can talk about that a little bit later, but that's kind of a rough sketch of who I am and my journey and how I came to be in this position professionally, which I love. I love the work that I do.
I love this. So I first was introduced to, we'll call it precision medicine, but it was really around pharmacogenomics, which I cannot say either. PGX, we're going to call it that because for some reason, that word just absolutely is a mouthful for me. But I first heard about it about 5 or 6 years ago, and they were using it around cancer treatment. And I was so excited. I'm like, this is amazing. This makes so much sense. You're going to get people the right care at the right time, and we're going to avoid all this trial and error. And then it just kind of nothing really happened with it. So I'm assuming that maybe something similar happened in your journey.
Yeah. Pharmacogenomics, so PGX, I think a lot of people in healthcare feel the way that you do about PGX. They feel like there was this promise, right, of this science and this technology that's going to help us figure out which drug is right for which patient. And the dirty little secret is that it's still out there. And it's not getting used um, because the traditional carrier insurance companies don't believe that it has enough clinical evidence to merit its use, largely speaking. And um, when you look at that statement really closely, what actually it boils down to is we we would rather not pay for this entire space than start paying for certain use cases. And so what happens is it's like it's almost like we don't have any precision medicine, right? And that has to do with a lot of like technical factors I don't necessarily want to get into. But what I will say is that I think that's also really starting to change, because pharmacogenomics, there are some parts of pharmacogenomics, like some tests that you could do that can help you figure out which behavioral health drug or which psych drug is right for a person. And sometimes you can have this conversation with insurance companies and you can hear something like, well, the drug is so cheap now that the diagnostic is actually maybe even more expensive than the drug. So why should we pay for this diagnostic that's going to tell us whether or not this drug, it used to be expensive, but now it's cheap. Why should we even pay for this test? And what's happening there is a complete ignorance of the fact that when you give drugs to patients and those drugs don't work, there are a lot of negative clinical side effects that then are massively expensive to our healthcare system. So you can look at that and you can say, okay, well, in that particular situation, maybe the diagnostic test, was a little bit more expensive than the drug in question, even though you totally just looked at that in a little box, right? You didn't ask yourself, like, and what is the consequence of somebody going on a psych drug and it not working for them, and then them showing up in the emergency room 3 days later because they're having a psych episode, right? Those economics didn't get factored in. But then you really start to blow out the issue of pharmacogenomics and you start to say, okay, well, what about diagnostic tests for drugs that are really expensive, right? What about drugs like Humira? What about biologics? What about specialty drugs in general? And what about diagnostics that determine whether or not those drugs are going to be effective? And that's where you get into a really interesting conversation around precision medicine. And that's where things are really starting to change in our space. So I would say PGX was a conversation that, I think a lot of people got really excited about it. It didn't get as much traction. We as an industry are still trying to get PGX the commercial credit and traction that it deserves, but we're also moving on to answering these questions for a variety of other drugs that really do kind of activate people's attention because they are so expensive.
So I'm sure that you can't see the blood dripping down my chin from where I've been biting my tongue during this, because I don't think the reason the insurance companies don't want to pay for diagnostic testing for precision medicine or precision medications is because they don't think it's effective or they think it's too expensive. I think it's because it's easier to do things the way that they're doing them now. And
Yes.
and we have the ACA rules around minimum loss ratios, and they walk a fine line between we've got to spend X number of dollars in claims so we can earn more money, but we don't want to go over because we have to maximize our profits. So there's always that
Yes.
angle that you have to keep in the back of your mind anytime you're dealing with especially fully insured plans and the efficacy of doing something like this. But when we go from PGX to what you're doing, it
Hmm.
is going to get more attention because, as you mentioned, if we're talking about biologics, Humira, Enbrel, any of the Remicade, any of these, they're quite expensive. They tend to average around $5,000 a month plus. So people are like, oh, you mean we can potentially avoid spending money on some of this? Maybe we'll listen. But again, then we have the backroom
Hmm.
dealings of pharmaceutical rebates. So it's just
Hmm.
such a messy game. But let's just talk about it from a clinical standpoint on
Yeah.
doing the right thing at the right time for the right person.
Yes, let's talk. What a refreshing place to begin. Let's talk about how things should work.
Yes.
Absolutely, and then we can talk about the financial incentives because I totally agree with you. For the record, and I think that there's any variety of ways to say them, but ultimately, this is a battle between building a healthcare ecosystem that values diagnosis and prevention and staying in a healthcare ecosystem with entrenched financial incentives that reward end stage crisis care. I think that's kind of the big theme that all this lives under. Clinically speaking, the drugs like Humira, drugs like Enbrel are all what are called rationally designed targeted therapies. What does that mean? That means that when pharma developed these drugs, they weren't like throwing spaghetti at a wall. They know what kind of pathway they were targeting in the human body. So, like rheumatoid arthritis goes through a variety of pathways in the body. One of those pathways is the anti TNF pathway. Humira is an TNF inhibitor. It basically blocks the TNF highway, if you will. There are, the JAK class, right? JAK inhibitor blocks the JAK highway. That's a way to think about it. And so you can imagine that um, if you're a rheumatoid arthritis patient and your rheumatoid arthritis is being driven along the anti TNF highway, if you use Humira, well, that drug's going to work on you, right? Because that Humira is sitting there and it's blocking the rheumatoid arthritis that's driving along that highway and sort of, oh, RA can't drive anymore because there sits Humira, roughly speaking. But what if your rheumatoid arthritis is driven along the JAK highway? Well, if you give that person Humira, right? It's like two trains passing in the night. And that's a framework for thinking about how precision medicine works in the specialty drugs. And so it's really this question now because when Humira was approved, I think it was FDA approved in 2002, we didn't have the diagnostic technology to be able to figure this out. So
Of
the
course.
FDA had to approve Humira for all patients because at the time it was like, well, any RA patient could respond to Humira. We have to give it to them to find out, right? Well, now wrong. We know for a fact that Humira only works on 36% of rheumatoid arthritis patients because now zooming back, all of these patients, their disease is driven along different highways in the body, right? 30% of RA patients is driven like this, 30% driven like this, right? This starts to make sense. And so you're in a situation now where we have these diagnostic technology to be able to look at RA patients, to be able to look at psoriasis patients, MS patients, and ask the question, you individual patient, what are the ways that the disease is driven in your body? And let's match that to the drug class that works along that same pathway. And that is precision medicine for specialty drugs. And I think it's again to the financial incentives, but it's incredibly unfortunate, and I would actually call it tragic that the American people don't understand this better, and that's by design, right? But ultimately, when an employer looks at their healthcare spend, when they look at their Humira spend, they're not asking the question, how often did that Humira that I just paid for, or insert your drug of interest here, how often did that drug actually work on my people? How many times did that drug help that person? And how many times did that drug hurt that person? Or how many times did that drug not help that person? And then they had to go on another drug and another drug, right? To find the drug that works for them. That's not a question that employers are asking. And I want every employer in America to start asking that question. Because when you start asking that question of your drug spend, it opens an entirely different conversation because now you're starting to talk about money that was spent correctly, if you will, right? Money that was spent yielding good clinical response and money that was unfortunately wasted, and not just wasted, but money that was then used on drugs that harmed people, that created adverse events. And here's one more piece of this before we kind of go off on the clinical side of things. When a patient goes on a specialty drug like a biologic, and they don't respond, their ability to respond to the next drug decreases. And after a certain time, they can't respond to any of these drugs. So you are creating a massive clinical consequence when you are signing patients up for this trial and error cycle of drug assignment.
Okay, so I have a question for you, and I know you can't answer it specifically, but let's just pretend.
Mhm.
So let's pretend I have rheumatoid arthritis. I've been suffering for a while. I finally get in to see a rheumatologist. What are they going to do? How are they going to test that I actually have rheumatoid arthritis? And what is going to go into their decision making as far as which prescription, which biologic they prescribe to me? Because I have not seen good data going into decision making. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can answer this question for RA, we can answer it for psoriasis,
Sure.
because if you have one of these diseases, at some point you're going to go in to see a specialist, like rheumatologist. And in rheumatology, there's they basically look at your joints and they count what percentage of your joints aren't doing well, and that's kind of
Right.
how they decide that you have RA. And then they're going to put you on certain drugs, corticosteroids, methotrexate, like I would say cheap
Yes.
drugs, right? They're going to put you on those drugs and they're going to see if it improves. And after a while, those drugs are going to stop working. It's not going to improve your condition. And they're going to say, okay, time to bring out the big gun drugs, right? It's time for a biologic. Or it's time for a specialty drug, I should say, because some are biologics, some are small molecules. We don't need to get into that, but like it's time for a specialty drug. And so at that point, they are going to start doing healthcare formulary science, because at that point, they're going to look at your insurance and they're going to look at what your specialty drug benefit is. And they're going to, and actually, it's usually the biologic coordinator within the office that's going to do this, not the doctor themselves. But that person is going to look and they're going to figure out what is the drug that we can put you on that's going to basically be least financially impactful for you, right? So in rheumatoid arthritis, 90% of the time, when it's time for RA patients to go on a biologic, they're going to go on an anti-TNF like Humira or Enbrel. Why is this? Because anti-TNFs are entrenched in formulary. They are first-line formulary for rheumatoid arthritis. Fun fact, that's not necessarily true for other autoimmune conditions like psoriasis and others. So the formulary science gets a lot more nuanced here. But in RA, that's the situation. They're going to put you on an anti-TNF. And then if the anti-TNF doesn't work, they might put you on another anti-TNF. And if that doesn't work, then they'll switch your drug class and they'll put you on a different class of drug. Now, let's just think about that real quick from the perspective of the highways that I just talked about, right?
Exactly.
Why on earth would you cycle somebody through 2, sometimes 3 anti-TNFs before you put them on another drug class if we now know what we know, right, about how disease is driven in the body? That's why I say that I feel like these things are kept from people on purpose sometimes.
Oh, I agree with you. Okay, so let's just pretend that somebody has I have rheumatoid arthritis. They have diagnosed me. They've counted the number of joints affected. They've determined I have rheumatoid arthritis. They've given me the all the methotrexate and all that stuff. Hasn't worked. I'm getting worse. I go back in and I'm like, I'm just not getting better, doctor. And he says, okay, we're going to try Humira. And I say, what is that going to do for me? What are my risks? And are there better alternatives for me? The common answer usually is, we won't know until we try this one first. Which if I'm lucky and I'm on the one highway and that's the one it's going to treat, great. But if I'm that's only a 30% chance, 36% chance that I am in that category. But if I'm on the other 64%, it's going to cost me a lot of money. I'm going to still be uncomfortable, and I am inhibiting my ability to respond to the next drug, hoping that they get it right the next time. So if I know this, let's just pretend I know this because I'm me. And I say to the doctor, I'd like to be tested to determine the right biologic to start with. Most of them are going to look at me like I've just, sprouted a third head. How do you have a conversation with a doctor on, let's just say I'm willing to pay for it because I want to start with the right drug. It's going to be a lot less expensive for me. It's going to just be better for my entire life. How do you address that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say the first question, the universal question, and the thing to start doing tomorrow, and I say this to as many people as I possibly can. Anytime a doctor tells you that they're going to put you on a drug, or they're going to do any sort of therapy, the first question should be, how do you know this is going to work on me? Because most of the time, the doctor is going to say, just like you said, I don't. And then it opens the question of, okay, well, is there a way to figure out if this is going to work on me? And that forces a conversation of, well, maybe there is and maybe there isn't, but more and more, again, because diagnostic technology has come so far, for more and more, the answer is going to be, well, actually, there might be. Let me look into it. And this also starts the conversation of how completely overwhelmed, overworked physicians are. There's no scalable solution in this country for teaching physicians how technology is solving their clinical practice problems. And so a lot of times you're at the mercy of that particular physician. But if you ask that question, now that physician is talking to a patient about, a clinical question. Now they're going to go look, they're going to go ask the question. And if you put it on Google, they're going to find, oh, there's a diagnostic company out here that says that they can do that, they have this diagnostic. Let me write for it, right? Let me order it. Let me call the company. Let me get a test. That's, that's the dream. I think what we're going to start seeing is PBMs come into the play as well, and not the traditional PBMs that make more money the more Humira gets written and goes out the door, but the PBMs whose business model is financially aligned with decreasing total cost of care and improving outcomes for employers, because those PBMs are asking similar questions.
Well, that's 100% right. But to take that even a step further, and then I'm going to address the question on the screen, is that's also going to require the effort of consultants that are paying attention to these things and that are looking to, we're always looking to effectively manage costs in a way that provides the best level of care. It's not just pushing costs down for the sake of pushing costs down. It's how do we effectively and appropriately spend the healthcare dollars that we have available. And this is a really great way of redirecting some money from maybe that first fill to have the first fill be the right fill. And I think that that's a huge piece. So I want to address this question from Anthony. He says, how can self-funded employers influence the formulary or seek a medical alternative, such as testing before prescribing?
That's a great question. So I would say that the conversation between the employer and the broker or consultant needs to start being, need to look at our drug spend, and we need to start understanding by working with me, by starting to think about your spend differently, and understanding how do we make sure that the money that we're spending on drugs is actually, we're spending it to get the right, to get the patient the right drug from the start. And that is going to very quickly start a conversation around the PBM and the PBM contract. And that's where things are going to get interesting in a variety of ways, because the traditional PBM model is a rebate driven model. The more and that model values getting an employer the best cost for Humira, meaning your total Humira, your Humira fill is the least, it's the least expensive, right? But at the same time, if you're giving Humira to a bunch of people who aren't responding to it, then your total cost of care is up, right? Doesn't matter what it is per fill. But that's where, again, like if you're working with traditional PBMs, then the conversation is quickly going to get to, if you want us to start using diagnostics to determine whether or not a drug is appropriate, you're changing the way that the drug is being prescribed. And I say that sentence specifically because that is contractual language, right? Once you start changing the way the drug is prescribed, now there's going to be a conversation around, well, you may lose your rebate. And that's where I think the brokers and the consultants have an incredible opportunity to to really call the bluff, right? And to start doing the math on what is the total cost of care, and what happens to total cost of care when we have valued, you know, the amount of money we're spending per Humira fill over the total amount of money we're spending on our RA patients, because that's going to start a conversation around, switching PBMs. It's going to start a conversation around changing the contractual language with the PBM, and what's working in the favor of all these conversations is that 15 years ago, a PBM could say, "Look, it's almost like they had plausible deniability, right? Because you couldn't find in the clinical literature a diagnostic, or you couldn't find proof that not every RA patient can respond to Humira. Guess what? We have that now, right? Because in order for a diagnostic to publish its clinical literature and say that, hey, we're amazing at figuring out which patients will and will not respond to which drugs, they have to publish all this literature. So now you as an employer, you as a broker can stand up with clinical studies and say, here is clinical scientific proof that not every patient can respond to every drug. Now let's hold in one hand this clinical science, and in the other hand, let's hold my PBM contract, which mandates that I, put everybody on a TNF first. And now your job is to, marry these two things, please, and help me figure out how that works." And I think that's where things are going to get nuanced. That's where they're going to get tricky. But the other side of those very difficult conversations is a financial and clinical strategy that works for the employer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a big shift for PBMs, for TPAs, for employers, for consultants, but more importantly for physicians too, because they're just not thinking about it. And it's not saying anything negative, it's just a fact. They're just not thinking about this. However, I think that we just need to raise the awareness, and we need to start shouting it from the bullhorn, because if you think about it and you go into the doctor and you maybe think you have a broken bone or whatever the case may be, they're not going to hesitate to order an MRI with contrast when an x-ray will do. So it's really about appropriate care at the appropriate time for the appropriate patient. And we need to be focused on, how do you treat this patient?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing I would say about that is that precision medicine, I always start talking about precision medicine with this example, because I think this example really helps. It helps people frame up the problem, and helps them really understand the urgency of the situation, right? And it helps them stop seeing precision medicine as like some fancy medicine I can't afford, and it starts them thinking about it as critical medicine, right?
I love that term.
And but precision medicine is bigger than just the diagnostics that can help us figure out whether or not a patient is going to respond to Humira, get the patient on the right drug from the beginning. Precision medicine is things like, hey, when we look at the when we look at all of the different stages at which we find cancer in this country, we find that 50% of lung cancer in the US is found in stage 3 and stage 4. And do you know what the lung cancer screening rate is in the US for the people who are supposed to be screened for lung cancer? The people who are supposed to be screened, it's 5%. 5. So precision medicine is diagnostics that can help you find the lung cancer in stage 1, find the breast cancer early, figure out, find colorectal cancer before it's even colorectal cancer, where you can just cut it out. You don't even have to treat a patient for cancer. And what's incredible is that if we use precision medicine to remove all of this wasteful and inappropriate drug spending, we can fund our healthcare journey. And what that will do is it will start to shift all the costs, right? Because you're moving the bell curve of when we find things earlier stage, which means they are so much more cost effective to treat, and the outcomes are so much better.
I just think this is phenomenal, and it's exciting to me. And I wish I could literally go knock on every rheumatologist's door and say, "Do you know about this?" Because most of them are going to say no. But the bigger problem is, I know that I would say 95+% of consultants don't know about this.
Yes. I totally agree. And I think, rheumatologists, I think about 20% of rheumatologists in the country now use a diagnostic test to determine whether or not patients will respond to anti-TNF drugs. That's a diagnostic called PrismRA. It's made by a company called Cipher Medicine. There's a phenomenal one in psoriasis as well. It's called Mind.px, made by a company called Mindera Health. Email me, message me. I'm happy to connect you with all, with these resources. Um, but but that's why I care so much about educating the brokers and the consultants, because I think the physicians, you're absolutely right. It's so difficult to educate physicians. They have so much going on. Being a physician in America today is a really, really hard job, even without learning everything that's going on in the technology industry, right? And then being held responsible for it. But I think that if we can educate the broker and consultant community, we can give America's companies this trusted and informed advisor. And that's really where we can start pressing on the contractual language for the PBMs, right? Pressing on the financial incentives. And that's where we can create real change.
I have to read this because this is one of my favorite things. It says, I will actually pulled this from your website for Alva 10, which I think you even mentioned your company name. So that is the name of the company that Lena is one of the co-founders of. The
Yeah.
mission statement says to create an economic ecosystem to pull technology into healthcare to align, incentive, and optimize for patient outcomes and payer economics. I literally think that is the perfect way to describe this. So what do you think is the biggest resistance to more widespread adoption of this practice? Because really, you've summed up what we should all be doing when we build a health plan.
Entrenched financial incentives. 100%. I think, I almost wish that there was another answer, because I feel like we say this word so often, right? And yet that continues to be the problem year after year after year. Um, so I would say that when you're building new health plans, and I see this right now with the transparent PBMs, I see this with some of the startup health plans, the carriers that are coming online. They are designing with technology in mind, right? But the entrenched carriers and the PBMs, this technology, everything from the claims processing technology to the way they build formularies, this is 30, 40-year-old technology. It's incredibly clunky, and it's like turning the Titanic. You can't do that efficiently or easily. And then of course, all of the way that they make money is um, is based on a fee for service world. And you make more money in the US, no matter who you are, you make more money when you are treating sicker patients. So until we move more aggressively to a value-based care world where you are being rewarded for patient outcomes, you're being rewarded for saving money, we're going to continue to have to fight to be heard when we talk about diagnosis and prevention.
So you're right. My final comment on this before we move to the last part of my show is that consumers tend to forget we're always the payer. You
Mhm.
may not think you're the payer because you're on your employer's health insurance plan or you're on a individual ACA plan. You may think the only thing you're paying is the premium, but the premium is driven by poor spending by healthcare plans. So everybody should be invested in this absolutely game-changing technology. They should know that it's available. And if you're in the situation where and it doesn't have to be a biologic, it can be a mental health drug. Ask your doctor, why are you prescribing this to me? What are my alternatives? Do you know this is the right thing? Because we have to be a part of the change. Every single person has to be a part of the change. And nothing's going to change unless we start demanding it.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. I totally agree.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you off the hook of the science and math part for a minute. And now we get to move on to the fun part of the show.
Sure.
Are you ready?
It's sure. It's all fun for me.
Okay. What's your absolute favorite food in the world and can you cook it?
So my absolute favorite food in the world is a dish called plof, Plof. It comes from my homeland, Azerbaijan, which is a little country. If you look at Russia and you go down, you'll run right into Azerbaijan. And it's a dish, and I can cook it, but I usually like to cook it with family because this is a very family-centric dish. It has three components. It has rice with saffron. It has
Mm.
a bunch of stewed fruits like raisins, apricots, and it's got this incredible chicken that's stewed for hours and onions until the onions just like melt all over the chicken. And when you put these three things on a plate together, it's called plov, and it is absolutely incredible. My favorite dish.
That sounds amazing. I'm gonna have to look for that next time I'm in a place where I could potentially order that. Probably not Azerbaijan, but
Yeah, but you
I
know
did.
what? The food culture is really starting to take off. I'm starting to see some Georgian chefs in the US, so I think we're getting there.
Yes. Well, and I actually knew where it is just because, they have an F1 race there. So I'm
That's
like, I
yes,
actually know where it is.
that's right. That's right.
Uh, okay, so what character trait do you most admire in other people and why?
Uh, I would have to say I most admire integrity. Um, I have found in my life that the people that have integrity in every facet, it drives so many of the other characteristics that I admire. And I also find that the people that have integrity are the people who are the most authentic. And I love authenticity. I think it's incredibly courageous to be authentic. And so yeah, and when I look at authenticity, like I almost feel like I can draw a line back to integrity. So I'm going to go with integrity.
I like that. Okay, but now I'm going to actually flip the mirror on you. So what quality in yourself are you most proud of and why?
Um, I am most proud of my resilience, I think. And this is fascinating. I've never been asked this question before. I think I'm most proud of my resilience. I'm a Gen Zero immigrant. I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia. My family came here when I was 2.5. My parents gave everything on this planet for me to be here and grow up in America. And I'm incredibly lucky for that. And I think that that has birthed in me a true resilience within the healthcare movement that we are driving forward in diagnosis and prevention in Alva 10. Um, Academically, I look at my life and I see resilience, and I'm grateful for that. And I think it's what's enabled me to do the work that I love with energy, because this is hard work. Anybody today who is trying to change healthcare, and trying to create a true system of wellness for Americans is doing hard work, and I'm energized to do that because of my resilience, I would say.
I love that. That's a wonderful answer. Okay, so if someone is prescribed a biologic for the first time,
Mhm.
what's the one question they should ask their physician before starting treatment?
How do you know this is going to work on me?
Perfect. I love that. All
Mm.
right. So this is a fun one. What's your secret talent or something people would be surprised to learn about you?
Ooh, um, I think I'm going to go a little out of the box for this one. A lot of people don't know this about me. I am a marksman.
I love that.
Marksmanship. Okay, so it's a good answer because I just saw the look on your face, and that was clearly, I
Yeah,
think, what we were going for. So marksmanship is it's an Olympic sport. It was actually one of the first, I think, 8 or 9 original Olympic sports that
it was.
premiered in Athens, in like the 1880s, 90s. And yeah, so I've been a marksman for over half my life. I competed through school, and was awarded some scholarships on this, and actually could have pursued this in a variety of ways, more semi-professionally, but and didn't end up going to those universities. I chose a different path, but I still practice whenever I can. And I love marksmanship because so much of it requires incredible stillness, incredible precision. It's a game of extreme nuance to be able to hit a target, and it actually requires you to be as still as possible. And you're actually also, when you're shooting, you have all this really heavy equipment on, and yet every muscle tremor, right, is the difference between a bullseye and a two. And I just love and have always loved that combination of pressure, precision, stillness. I've loved it for years, and I competed in it. So
Okay, so that might be my favorite answer ever. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. So good, so good. I love it. Okay, last question. Who is one person, famous or otherwise, living or dead, that you would most love to be able to sit down and have a cup of coffee and a conversation with?
Okay, so I'm gonna go a little out of the box for this. Nancy, you with these questions, I love it. So the person that I most want to have coffee with is Odette Sansom. Odette Sansom, I know this because I went on vacation a couple of years ago and I brought this book with me, and little did I know what an impact this book was going to have on me. This was a book about this woman named Odette Sansom, who was the most decorated spy during World War II. Okay, so this is a woman who was French and English. She lived in England, adopted homeland. She was French, and World War II came, and she answered the call by taking her 3 daughters and leaving them in England in a convent and training herself to be a spy with the War Office. And she survived 5 failed attempts to get into France. She finally got into France, right? Like, you would think that if you don't get into France 4 times and you aren't able to do that, maybe call it off. No, this woman achieved it on the 5th try, parachuted into World War II France, and then went on to just do a record-breaking number of missions. And that to me is just such extreme bravery. And when I think about that, I'm a mother of 2 young children. To answer your nation's call like that, right? To take your children, and her husband also had passed away. So it was her and her kids. And this is what this woman does. It's just, to me, incredible bravery, the greatest generation, which I think is such a model for so many things. But yeah, I read her story and I was just completely floored. Odette Sansom, that is my person, because I would just sit down and ask her, like, how does your mind work? Like, and how were you able to achieve these things? You're the most decorated spy during World War II.
Sounds like my next book club book. That sounds great.
I'll send it to you.
So yeah, amazing answers. So thank you so much, Lena. If anybody wants to learn more about precision medicine, whether you're a broker, whether you're a physician, whether you're an individual patient, how would they reach out to you?
You can. I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. If you follow Nancy on LinkedIn, you'll see that she has a post with this live. You can also just email me, lena@alva, the number 1010.com. Lena@alva10.com. Would be happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. And if for some reason you didn't get all of that, reach out to me and I will make sure that you get connected. So thank you so much, Lena. This was really a fun session. And for the rest of you, I will not be here next week. So it'll be 2 weeks and I will see you again here at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thanks for joining us today.